Good morning, everyone. Today we will see a new topic that is inflammatory bowel disease. So first of all, we will see what is mean by inflammatory bowel disease. So inflammatory bowel disease, it is an immune-mediated chronic intestinal condition. So focus on these words. The first word is immune mediated. So what is mean by immune mediated? So it means in this condition or in this inflammatory bowel disease, there is no definite etiology, and disease is specifically because of, or you can say mediated because of immune system, or you can say there is dysregulation of our immune system or our immune response in this condition. So that's why word immune mediated is mentioned here. And second word is chronic. So what is mean by chronic, you all know. So this word needs no explanation. So inflammatory bowel disease, it is an immune mediated chronic intestinal condition, and it includes one, ulcerative colitis, and second one is Crohn's disease. So this ulcerative colitis means what? So it is a disorder in which the inflammation, it usually affects the mucosa and submucosa of the colon. And whereas what is mean by Crohn's disease, that inflammation, it is transmural, and it involves any or all segments of the GI tract. So in between these two conditions, there are two basic differences. So what are these two basic differences? One is that in ulcerative colitis, only the mucosa and submucosa of the colon is involved, whereas Crohn's disease, it is transmural. So what is mean by transmural means that inflammation is beyond this gastrointestinal tract, or you can say beyond this intestinal wall. So that's why the word transmural is here. And what is the second difference? That ulcerative colitis is usually affects only the colon. So only colon is affected in ulcerative colitis, whereas in Crohn's disease, any, or you can say all segments of the gastrointestinal tract, they are affected. So these are the two basic differences between these two conditions. So this diagram shows, or you can say by this diagram you can understand the involvement in both this condition. So in ulcerative colitis, only the mucosa and submucosa is involved. So this is the demarcation. So in this diagram, you can understand the difference between these two conditions. So in ulcerative colitis, here you can see the ulceration is only limited to the mucosa, whereas in Crohn's disease, that ulceration you can see is extended, or it includes the mucosal layer, submucosal layer, muscularis, and also the serosal layer. So these are the two differences you can see in these two conditions. The patients who have features of inflammatory bowel disease but cannot be clearly categorized into any of these two diseases, they are labeled as indeterminate colitis. So what is mean by indeterminate colitis? So the patient may present with features of inflammatory bowel disease, but these features, they are not sufficient uh, to be able to categorize between these two conditions. So for example, we can see, uh, suppose a patient comes with some watery loose stool, and on endoscopy examination we can see that suppose a rectum is involved. So what is mean by rectum is involved? So that means patient has feature of ulcerative colitis, because we have seen that in ulcerative colitis only the colon is involved. So in colon, most common site for ulcerative colitis is rectum. So suppose rectum is involved in inflammatory process. And what is second point? Second point is that if there is an inflammation and we suspect inflammatory bowel disease, and if we suspect ulcerative colitis, that inflammation should only involve the mucosa and submucosa, right? So if that inflammation here is transmural, so what is the difference? So transmural, this process, it is usually seen in Crohn's disease, right? And it is usually involved small intestine. Obviously, rectum is uncommon in Crohn's disease, but if rectum is involved and inflammation is transmural, so here are two different features in a patient. Secondly, we can again see one more difference that uh, in ulcerative colitis, so we were seeing regarding this intermediate colitis. So in that we have seen that location is rectum, but the inflammation is transmural. So there are two contrasting features. Again, one more difference you can see here, that in ulcerative colitis, inflammation is basically continuous in nature, and whereas Crohn's disease is segmental. So suppose here you see some segmental inflammation. So in that case, you cannot categorize this condition into any of these two conditions, because there are some contrasting features. That one is site is uncommon, second that inflammation is transmural, and again this inflammation, it can be segmental or it can be continuous. So these are some contrasting features. If such contrasting features they are present, so it can be labeled as indeterminate colitis. Both ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, they are worldwide disorders. So that means they are found in nearly all countries. So it is not specific to one countries, although the precise incidence, it varies in different countries. So as we are living in Asian, so we will see the scenario in Asia. So in Asia, the disease was thought to be uncommon, but the recent reports, they have highlighted the increasing incidence of this disease. So that means previously this inflammatory bowel disease, it was uncommon in Asian countries. The rapid change in incidence and prevalence in Asia, it may point towards the environmental changes which are associated with social, you can say, environmental changes which are usually associated with westernization of lifestyle. So that includes dietary changes and smoking as a potential risk factor. So in Asia also, mostly in India also, that westernization of lifestyle, it has been occurred. So on dietary, there are changes in diet also, that people started eating more junk food, and their time of meal, it has also been changed. So these are some dietary changes that have occurred in Asia also, in India also. Second one is smoking. So all you know that there is increase in habit of smoking, cigarette smoking or BD smoking. So all you know. So these are some potential risk factors for this inflammatory bowel disease. So this we will discuss in etiopathogenesis also. Inflammatory bowel disease, it typically affects young people, but it may have bimodal incidence. So what is mean by bimodal incidence? So that means it can affect both young and adult individuals, with a second peak in later life. So the first peak, or you will usually see between the 15 to 25 years of age, whereas second peak in later life, that means between 55 to 64 years of age. The Crohn's disease, it is frequently diagnosed in the late adolescence or early adulthood, that is between 18 to 24 years of age, with a median age of diagnosis in third decade. Means the most of the patients, they are diagnosed to be suffering with inflammatory bowel disease usually in the third decade. The men are more likely to be affected with ulcerative colitis, whereas women with Crohn's disease. So, however, there is no definite evidence which supports these findings. So, it is still under, you can say, research. Right. So the next part that we are going to see in inflammatory bowel disease is its etiopathogenesis. Under physiological conditions, that is in an uninflamed intestine, you can say that in under physiological conditions, the homeostasis, it usually exists between the commensal microbiota. You can also call it as a commensal gut flora also. Then intestinal epithelial cells and immune cells. So all you are all aware about this commensal microbiota. So what is mean by commensal microbiota, or you can say commensal microorganisms, which means these microorganisms, they are already present in our intestine without harming our body. So they are already present in intestine. They are living. They are taking the nutrition from us, but in a harmless way. So these are the commensal bacteria, and also they help our body for various processes. Second factor in this homeostasis is intestinal epithelial cells, and third one is, or you can say third compartment is immune cells. So there is a normal homeostasis which exists between these three compartments. So before understanding etiopathogenesis, I have mentioned some physiological points regarding these factors. So I have explained about commensal microbiota. Then next one is intestinal epithelial cells. So basically this intestinal epithelial cells, it provides a physical and biochemical barrier that segregates host tissue and commensal bacteria to maintain the intestinal homeostasis. So that line is most important, that this epithelial cells, it usually acts as a barrier and it separates, or you can say segregates, the host tissue and commensal bacteria, so which will maintain normal homeostasis. So in this diagram, we can see in this area there are some commensal bacteria, whereas our immune cells, they are present in this area. So these are separated by this epithelial lining. So this act as this barrier which segregates these two compartments. These epithelial cells, they also convey some microbial signals to the mucosal immune cells and promote the coordination of appropriate immune response against the commensal bacteria and enteric pathogens. So suppose somehow some enteric pathogens, they are present. So this epithelial cells, it will convey, or you can say uh, the signals to this immune cells, mucosal immune cells, for what, to properly coordinate the appropriate immune response against this commensal bacteria also and enteric pathogen also. Normal uninflamed intestine, it contains a large number of immune cells that are in a unique state of activation, in which the gut is restrained from full immunological response to the commensal microbiota and dietary antigens. So this line is important. We all know that our immunity, or you can say our body, it usually respond to any microorganisms, or you can say foreign particles, some irritants or microorganisms, right? So in our body, you all know, there are nearly 300 to 1000 different species of microorganisms. They are already present in our gut, so they are commensal, right? So there are nearly 300 to 1000 different species, but nearly 90% of these commensal microorganisms, they belong to only 30 to 40 different species. So definitely is a different scenario, but you should understand that there are nearly thousands of varieties of microorganisms, they are present in our intestine, but there is no immunological response against this microorganism. So why? Because they are in a unique state of activation. So uh, you should focus on this word, that in a unique state of activation. So what is mean by that? So if our immune cells, they are not responding to this commensal bacteria, it doesn't mean they are inactive, right? So they are in an active state, but they do not respond to this commensal microbiota and also the dietary antigens. So obviously, so it is obvious that dietary antigens, they are also foreign particles to our body. So still there is no immunological response to dietary antigens. That is because of a pathway, or you can say a regulatory pathway exists, which is expressed by this FOXP3 transcription factor, also called as SCRPin. So many of you know or may know the SCRPin. So this suppress inflammation, or you can say this controls this immunological response. So that's why there is no full immunological response against this commensal microbiota. A consensus hypothesis. So word here is consensus, means most of gastroenterologists, or you can say most of the association, they agree to this hypothesis. So what is that hypothesis in the etiopathogenesis of inflammatory bowel disease? Is that each of these three major host compartments, like immune cells, epithelial cells, and commensal microbiota. So these three compartments, they are affected by some environmental factors and genetic factors. So, what are environmental factors? Maybe smoking, antibiotic, or enteropathogens, and genetic factors. So, this we will see later on. So, this factor in a susceptible host, they disrupt homeostasis, which culminates in a chronic state of a dysregulated inflammation, that is IBD. So, uh, these factors like environmental factors and genetic factors, so these factors in a susceptible host, so you should focus on this word also, that in a susceptible host, that means not in all subjects, only in susceptible subjects, it will disrupt homeostasis and it will culminate in a chronic state of dysregulated inflammation, that is inflammatory bowel disease. Despite of improved understanding of the mechanism of intestinal inflammation, the etiology and pathogenesis of inflammatory bowel disease, it remains obscure. So that we have already seen, or we can say this we can know by the definition of this inflammatory bowel disease, that it was already written, inflammatory bowel disease, it is an immune mediated condition. So it is obvious that you will not get some definite etiology and pathogenesis of this condition. However, the pathogenesis of this inflammatory bowel disease, it involves interplay of following factors, which in combination, so focus on every word. So there is an interplay first, and there is they are in combination, they result in chronic intestinal inflammation. So what are those factors? So first one is genetic, second one is environmental, third one is immune factors, and fourth one is third one is microbial, and fourth one is immune factors. So these three conditions that we have seen, but we will also see it in detail, and one additional is here genetic factors. So first we will see the genetic factors which are involved in the pathogenesis of inflammatory bowel disease. The most firmly established risk factor for developing inflammatory bowel disease is a positive family history. So suppose a patient has some positive family history of ulcerative colitis, or you can say Crohn's disease. So that patient has 30 to 100 times that of risk for the development of inflammatory bowel disease. So incidence of this inflammatory bowel disease among the first relatives of IBD is 30 to 100 times when we compare it with general population. Approximately 15% of patients with inflammatory bowel disease, they have first degree relative suffering from either ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. So suppose 100 patients are there which have inflammatory bowel disease. So among these 100, 50% patient they have family history of inflammatory bowel disease, or you can say positive family history of inflammatory bowel disease. So what are the genes which are usually involved in the pathogenesis of this inflammatory bowel disease? So first one is, the first gene is NOD2 or CARD2, or also called as inflammatory bowel disease 1 gene. So there are various names. So in some books it has been written only as NOD2, somewhere it has been written as CARD15, and in some books it has been written as IBD1. So all are same. So this gene, it is usually responsible for recognition of bacterial molecules, that is peptidoglycans, and stimulate immune reaction. So it is obvious that if this gene, if it starts recognizing, or you can say stimulating the immune reaction against commensal bacteria, it will lead to some chronic inflammation. Second one is MHC complex, which is also known as human leukocyte antigen complex. So this gene on chromosome 6, it has been or it has a great role in modifying the inflammatory bowel disease. So all you know that MHC complex, it has two classes, class 1 and class 2. So class 1, it usually represents T lymphocytes. So you can say cytotoxic T lymphocytes. And class 2, it usually expresses or represents antigen representing cells, dendritic cells, right? So it is obvious that that inflammatory, or you can say cellular immunity, it is under this MHC complex or MHC molecule. So if there is mutation in this HLA genes on chromosome 6, it will obviously lead, or you can say it will cause some dysregulation in our immune response. Next, the genes which are associated with fundamental cell biological processes and metabolic stress. So like XDP1, ORMDL3, and OCTN. So these are the genes which are involved in basic biological process and metabolic stress. So it is obvious that whenever the metabolic cell of a stress is increased, it will lead to inflammation, or you can say autophagy. So if there is mutation in these genes, they cannot tolerate, or you can say they cannot cope up with this metabolic stress, uh, and also their biological processes, they are not properly carried out, like cell movement, cell proliferation, and cell signaling. So all these processes, they are hampered, and which can culminate into the chronic inflammatory state. Next one, genes which are associated with innate immunity, right? So and autophagy also, like NOD2, IRGM, JAK2, STAT3. So these genes, how they help? They effectively clear bacteria, mycobacteria, and viruses. So all the enteropathogens, they are involved, or which are harmful. So these genes, they are usually involved to clearing these harmful bacteria, or you can say viruses. So suppose uh, these genes, they are dysregulated, so what will happen? They will also start clearing our commensal microbiota also. So obviously it will disrupt our normal homeostasis, and that will lead to the chronic inflammatory state. The next, genes which are associated with regulation of adaptive immunity. So this adaptive immunity, uh, which are usually associated with these genes like ILT, IL23R, IL12B, 10, and PTPN2. So all these are the shortcuts. So this regulate the balance between pro-inflammatory cytokines and anti-inflammatory cytokines. So there are various anti-inflammatory cytokines like interleukin 4, interleukin 6, 10, 8, 11. So all these are anti-inflammatory cytokines, and there are certain pro-inflammatory cytokines like interleukin 1, 12, 18, TNF, that is tumor necrosis factor, and interferon. So all these are pro-inflammatory cytokines. So these genes, they are usually essential to maintain, or you can say to regulate the balance between these cytokines. So if there is mutation in this gene, so what will happen, there will be dysregulation, or you can say there will be imbalance between these inflammatory cytokines, and which will again provoke, or you can say develop the inflammatory process in the intestine. The next, genes which are involved in the development and resolution of inflammation. So means these are the genes which can develop, or you can say which are involved in the development of inflammation also, and second one is resolution of that inflammation also, and ultimately the leukocyte recruitment and inflammatory mediated production. So these are the genes which are basically involved in the development and resolution of inflammation. So mutation of these genes like MST1, CCR6. So what will happen because of mutation of these genes? There can be overdevelopment of this inflammation, and there will be no resolution. So then in this way, it can lead to the inflammatory bowel disease, or you can say in chronic inflammatory condition. Then there are some environmental factors. So the dramatic rise in the incidence of recent decades points to the environmental factors as a potential risk factors for disease occurrence. So that we have seen that westernization of lifestyle, such as changes in diet, variance in exposure to sunlight. So many of people, they only work in a company, so they are not properly exposed to the sunlight, and again they are also not engaged in the physical activity in the morning. So overall, they are not exposed to the sunlight. Again, some patient, they are more exposed to the pollution. So the persons who are living in industrial area, they are more exposed to the pollution and industrial chemicals. So those who are working in the factory, they are usually exposed to these chemicals. They have been postulated to be responsible for the rising incidence. So there are various environmental factors which usually points, or you can say there is an association between these factors and development of inflammatory bowel disease. Next one is improved hygiene. So it is again, all you know, many of you may have heard regarding this point also. So nowadays, our hygiene has been improved both in urban and rural area also. So this improved hygiene, it will alter the intestinal flora by decreasing exposure to certain bacteria. So it is obvious that because of our improved hygiene, we will not have exposure to certain bacteria, and this can lead to, or you can say, which can have or which can act as a risk factor for the development of inflammatory bowel disease. So this may explain the higher frequency of both ulcerative colitis and chronic disease in higher socioeconomic groups. That there is some evidence that higher intake of fatty acids, it increases the risk of inflammatory bowel disease. So all you know, that MOFA and PUFA, that is monounsaturated fat and polyunsaturated fat. So these type of fats, they can increase the risk of inflammatory bowel disease. Similarly, frequent fast food intake, it confers the 3 to 4 fold greater risk for inflammatory bowel disease. However, studies, they are generally inconclusive, even though there are observation or findings which can suggest, or which usually describe that frequent fast food intake usually confers the greater risk of inflammatory bowel disease, but all these studies, they are usually inconclusive. Next one is smoking, so which is considered to be protective against ulcerative colitis. While patients with Crohn's disease, they will have frequent relapsation. So relapses. So the relationship between this, you can say, response between these two conditions, it is generally inconclusive. So many of the researchers, they don't know why this uh, response it varies between this ulcerative colitis and chronic disease. But some suggest that the nicotine, which is usually responsible to reduce, or you can say ease the inflammation, and that's why uh, this smoking, it usually acts as a protective against ulcerative colitis. Whereas this smoking, or you can say the nicotine, it also alters our blood flow, you can say blood flow to the intestine, and also it suppresses immunity, or you can say it suppresses immune response. So because of this suppression of immunity, and second one, if there is an alteration in blood flow, so because of these two reasons, the patient who smoke, they may have frequent relapses if they develop Crohn's disease. So it means the patients who have Crohn's disease and he continued to smoke, so this smoking, it will cause some relapsation or relapses of these events in that patient. Appendicectomy, so it has been reported to be a potential protective factor for ulcerative colitis. So certain studies, or you can say certain researches are there, which suggest or which states that appendicectomy, it can be protective factor for ulcerative colitis. So being an immune organ, it can alter the gut immune function and thereby influence the occurrence of ulcerative colitis. Some epidemiological studies, they reported an inverse relationship between appendicectomy and the incidence of ulcerative colitis, suggesting that appendicectomy, it may be helpful in the prevention of ulcerative colitis. So there is an inverse relationship between this appendicectomy and incidence of ulcerative colitis. Means what? So higher the incidence of appendicectomy, lower the incidence of ulcerative colitis. So this relationship, it usually suggests that appendicectomy, it may helpful in the prevention of ulcerative colitis. So even some studies, they states that the early sign of ulcerative colitis was appendicitis. So some part of appendix, they were inflamed before the appearance of ulcerative colitis. So that's why appendicectomy, it can be helpful in the prevention of ulcerative colitis. Other factors, in environmental factors, that may have role in the pathogenesis, or you can say precipitation of this inflammatory bowel disease. They are use of drugs like oral contraceptives, NSAIDs, and antibiotics, and mental stress. So because of mental stress, you will get increased cortisol level, so which is again responsible for precipitation of inflammation. So these are some factors which may have role in the pathogenesis of inflammatory bowel disease. Then there are some microbial factors. So humans, they are born sterile and acquire their commensal microbiota initially from the mother during egress through the birth canal and subsequently from environmental sources. So uh, we have seen in earlier slides that individual, many patients, person, all the persons, they have commensal microbiota with nearly 300 to 1000 different species. So all these commensal microorganisms, they are present, or you can say we acquire this commensal bacteria first during egress through the birth canal and subsequently from environmental sources. So during early life, so when we start acquiring these microorganisms, so during this early life, when the commensal microbiota is being established, these microbial effects, on the host may be particularly important in determining the later risk of inflammatory bowel disease. So many of the changes in these commensal microorganisms, they occur as a result, or you can say occur as a consequence of inflammation. So this lines means what? So we have already seen that there is a homeostasis which exists between these commensal bacteria, epithelial cells and immune cells. So if there is an inflammation, so which can change this commensal microbiota, and obviously there is disruption of this homeostasis which can then lead to the inflammatory state. So over the past decades, various pathogenic agents, they have been implicated, like Mycobacterium paratuberculosis, Chlamydia, cytomegalovirus, measles virus, E. coli, Yersinia enteropolitica, and Yersinia pseudotuberculosis. So these are the various microorganisms which has been implicated in the pathogenesis of this inflammatory bowel disease. However, the data, they do not confirm uh, these findings. So these microorganisms, they have definite role in the development of inflammatory bowel disease. So there are no evidence studies which can confirm these reports or findings. And again, antibiotics, they have not been effective in treating this inflammatory bowel disease. So suppose we say that Mycobacterium paratuberculosis, it is usually responsible for the development of IBD in a patient. So if this is the case, then it should respond to antibiotics, but there is not a case. So there is, or it is not like that, and that this patient is improved with antibiotics. So that's why all these observation, or you can say findings, they are inconclusive. Immune factors. So unlike in healthy individuals, the equilibrium between pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory cytokines, it is significantly deranged. So we have already seen during genetic factors that there is balance between anti-inflammatory and pro-inflammatory cytokines. So this balance, it is significantly deranged, and this dysregulation or imbalance of the immune reaction, it leads to the excessive activation of pro-inflammatory cytokines. And once they are excessively activated, so this excessive and prolonged activation of bowel associated immune system, it may result in causation of inflammatory bowel disease. So there are multiple mechanisms which are involved in the induction of oral tolerance. So what is meant by oral tolerance? That we have already seen that our immune system, that it do not respond to the dietary antigens. So that is because of some regulatory pathways. So that is scurfin that we have already seen. So that has been again mentioned here. So they are in a unique state of activation. So through which our gut, or you can say the dietary antigens and commensal bacteria, they are restrained from uh, full immunological response against them. So that has been again mentioned here. So in inflammatory bowel disease, so this suppression of inflammation, it is altered. So that is, we all know that our immune cells, or you can say gut immune cells, they are in a unique state of activation, so in which they do not give full immunological response to the commensal bacteria and dietary antigens. So this state of inflammation, or you can say suppression of inflammation, it is altered, leading to the uncontrolled inflammation. The mechanism of this regulated immune suppression, they are incompletely known. So that means we do not know what is the exact mechanism behind this and what causes this dysregulation, or you can say uh, disruption of this regulated immune response. Then we will see the site of involvement in inflammatory bowel disease. So first we will see ulcerative colitis. So in ulcerative colitis, the most common site of involvement is rectosigmoid region. So in 40 to 50% of cases, you will see that rectum and sigmoid, they are involved. Then in 30 to 40% of cases, that inflammation, it extends beyond this recto sigmoid region, and in 20% of cases, the extent, you can see that inflammation, it involves whole of the colon. So that is called as extensive colitis, right? So in this diagram you can understand, so that inflammation, it is usually continuous in nature. So there is no skip areas, or you can say there are no segments of inflammation. So that inflammation, it is usually continuous. So that is usually seen in ulcerative colitis. So whereas if you compare it with Crohn's disease, you will see segmental inflammation, right? So here is some area of inflammation, here is some area of inflammation, here is some area of inflammation, and there is no inflammation. So this is called a skip area, and then there is again inflammation. So this type of lesions, they are usually seen in Crohn's disease. And obviously this inflammation, it is transmural, whereas uh, in ulcerative colitis only, it is only limited to the mucosa and submucosa. So in Crohn's disease, the most common site of involvement is ileal or ileocolonic region, which is usually seen in 40% of cases, whereas in 30 to 40% of cases, patients, small intestine is involved, and in 20% of cases, colon is involved. You can see this part of colon is involved. You can say ascending colon, or this part of colon is involved. But you will observe that the rectum, it is not involved in Crohn's disease. So that is the involvement of rectum. It is usually uncommon in Crohn's disease. So even though we say that Crohn's disease, it may involve any or all segments of the gastrointestinal tract, right from the mouth to the anus, but uh, rarely that rectum is involved. So rectum is commonly involved in ulcerative colitis and rarely involved in Crohn's disease. So that diagram, so this is, or this slide is the explanation of that diagram. Is that ulcerative colitis, it usually affects 40 to 50% of patient. Uh, the ulcerative colitis, it is limited to the rectum and rectosigmoid region, and 30 to 40% of patients, they are extending beyond the sigmoid, but not of the whole colon, and 20% of patient, they will have total colitis. When the whole colon is involved, the inflammation extends 2 to 3 centimeter into the terminal ileum, and in 10 to 20% of patients. So what will happen if there is pan colitis, or you can say total colitis? So in this total colitis, 10 to 20% of patients, they may develop inflammation in the terminal ileum also. The proximal spread, it occurs in continuity without areas of uninvolved mucosa. So you should focus, or you can say you should remember this line that I have already explained, that inflammation in ulcerative colitis, it is basically in continuity. So there are no skip areas, or you can say there is no normal, or you can say there are no normal areas between two legends. So it is in continuity. Crohn's disease, so nearly 30 to 40% of patients that we have already seen. They have small bowel disease alone, means only small intestine is involved, and in that 75% patients, uh, the terminal ileum is involved in 90% of cases. So if there are suppose 100 patients which have Crohn's disease, so among these 100 patients, if 75 patients they have small intestine is involved, so in small intestine, so what is the most common site is terminal ileum. So this involvement of terminal ileum, it is seen in 90% of patients with small intestinal Crohn's disease. 40 to 55% they have disease involving the both small and large intestine. So you will see the mixed picture here, and 15 to 25% they have colitis alone, means only the colon is involved in 15 to 25% of patient. In 30 to 40% of patient, only small bowel is involved, whereas in 40 to 55% of patient, both small and large intestine they are involved. Unlike ulcerative colitis, which is almost always involves the rectum, the rectum is often spared in Crohn's disease. So that we have already seen that in ulcerative colitis, mostly the rectum is involved, but in Crohn's disease, rectum is not involved. And Crohn's disease, it is segmental with skip areas in the midst of disease intestine. So that is the basic difference. We should remember this difference between ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease is that the inflammation is segmental in Crohn's disease, whereas in ulcerative colitis it was in continuity, and there were no skip areas, whereas in Crohn's disease there are skip areas in the midst between diseased intestine. The next part is pathology. So first we will see the pathology regarding ulcerative colitis. So with mild inflammation, mucosa is glycomatous and has a fine granular surface that resembles a sandpaper. So it is obvious that we have already seen in ulcerative colitis only the mucosa and submucosa is involved. So that mucosa, it is usually erythematous and has a fine granular surface. So in this diagram you can see this area which looks like sandpaper. So this type of appearance, it is usually seen in mild inflammation. Whereas in long-standing disease, the inflammatory polyps, that is pseudopolyps, they may be present as a result of epithelial regeneration. So in this diagram, you can see there are polyps, right? So there are multiple polyps. These are called as pseudopolyps, which usually develops in long-standing ulcerative colitis. In more severe disease, the mucosa is hemorrhagic, edematous, and ulcerated. So in this diagram, you can see that hemorrhagic and ulcerated mucosa. So basically, this diagram, it is usually the combination of this ulcerated and hemorrhagic mucosa, and obviously second one is there is megacolon also. So what is mean by megacolon, that we will see. The patients with fulminant disease, so I don't need to explain what is mean by fulminant. So if patient who has ulcerative colitis with fulminant appearance, it can develop a toxic colitis or megacolon where the bowel wall thins and the mucosa is severely ulcerated and may lead to the perforation. So what is mean by megacolon, or you can say toxic colitis, is this condition. So that means you will see the dilatation of this colon, so that is called as megacolon. So in this blue diagram, you can see that this colon, it is usually distended or enlarged. Then it is obvious that the bowel wall, it will become thin, and when they will become thin, there are chances of perforation. So diagram on this right side, it shows megacolon also. You can see, I will show you. So you can see the diameter of this colon, so it is very much increased. So this diagram, it is usually seen in fulminant disease, or this type of presentation you will get in patients with fulminant disease. The next one is Crohn's disease. So unlike ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease is transmural process. So that we already know that Crohn's disease is a transmural process. So endoscopically, aphthous or small superficial ulcerations, they categorize or characterize mild disease, whereas in more active disease, you will see the cobblestone appearance. So you should remember this word, cobblestone appearance, that usually seen in more active disease of Crohn's disease. So what is mean by cobblestone appearance? So you will see some stellate ulceration which fuse longitudinally and transversely. So this characteristic of Crohn's disease, both endoscopically and by barium radiography, is most important. So as in ulcerative colitis, pseudopolyps can form in chronic disease also. So we have seen the pseudopolyps, so which were more prominent in ulcerative colitis. So this type of pseudopolyps, they can also form in Crohn's disease. So this diagram, it usually shows the cobblestone appearance which are usually seen in Crohn's disease. So one more diagram I have mentioned here, so which usually relates the cobblestone, or you can say cob pavements, which we see around our house or in colleges. So our intestine, or you can say our colon, it also becomes, or it also looks like this cobblestone pathway. So that's why it has given the name cobblestone appearance. So one more diagram which shows on the left side is mild Crohn's disease, and on the right side there is cobblestone appearance of intestine. So here you can see the aphthous ulceration, which are usually seen in mild Crohn's disease, whereas in the diagram on the right side it shows cobblestone appearance. Active Crohn's disease, it is characterized by focal inflammation and formation of fistula tracts which resolve by the fibrosis and stricturing of the bowel. So that we will see in the diagram also. The bowel wall thickness, the bowel wall thickens and becomes narrowed and fibrotic, leading to the chronic recurrent bowel obstructions. And again, projections of thickened mesentery, it encases the bowel, and serosal and mesenteric inflammation, which promotes adhesion and fistula formation. So that is the encasing of this bowel by the fat from this mesentery. It is called as creeping fat. So what will happen because of this encasing? It will lead to the adhesions and fistula formation. So this diagram, or in this diagram you can see there is formation of fistula also, and here there is cobblestone appearance also, and there is fibrotic stricture also. So in some cases abscess may be formed, and here this diagram shows the transmural inflammation. So these are some pathological features which are usually seen in Crohn's disease. So cobblestone appearance, this formation of fistula, which is called as enteroenteric fistula, then fibrotic stricture. So these are some pathological features that you should remember when you discuss this Crohn's disease. Again, this diagram shows that creeping fat, here you can see, which is encasing this intestine. So this one more diagram. So here you can see the encasing of the bowel by the fat from this mesentery. So this diagram usually shows why there is encasing of bowel by the mesenteric fat. So as we know, mesentery, which is the folds of peritoneum, and it is responsible for storing fat. So uh, in this area you can see this part of the intestine and this area, they are also in contact with mesentery. So in Crohn's disease, whenever there is inflammation, or you can say chronic inflammation, there may be encasing of this part of the intestine or colon by the this mesentery fat, so which will cause thickening of this colon, right? So that we have seen in previous slides. So it will cause again adhesion and fistula formation. So if the bowel wall thickens, and because of thickening, it will become narrowed, fibrotic, and which leads to the chronic and recurrent obstruction. So here you can see there is narrowing of this colon, so which can cause some chronic and recurrent obstruction. Then we will see